Oh, Mazel Tov. Should do like a niggin or something? I don't know. Good. Okay, well, it's good to see you, Shimon. And thanks for the snacks, as always. And yes, it's very much appropriate. How long, quickly, you have to know the exact number of days that Adina was pregnant for. You can, okay. Well,
צריך לספור כמה צעקות היו וכל דברים שזוכר.
100 פיות. That was last week. This week is about how long pregnancy takes, how many days. So, we will...
yeah, we bought them for the party for the middle. They didn't need them.
So we'll start with a statement of by Shmuel the Amora about how long pregnancy or harion takes. We'll quickly touch on a halachic component to it because there's a fascinating halachic discussion, but then we'll move on to some interesting agadot around the idea of pregnancy and end off with a chidush that I think is very interesting by the Yun Yaakov that I thought was a very, very good insight based on a midrash about Ruth and Boaz. Okay. The Gemara Niddah Lamed Chet Amud Aleph says as follows: Amar Shmuel, אין אישה מתעברת ויולדת אלא ל-271 יום, או ל-272 יום, או ל-273. So Shmuel says, first of all, right off the bat, pregnancy can only last for 271, 272, or 273 days. No more, no less.
Confident statement. Very easily disprovable.
It's very easily disprovable. Okay. Amar kechasidim harishonim. And when Shmuel said that, why did he say that? Because he's basing himself on the opinion of the early masters. Chasidim harishonim. Detanya, chasidim harishonim lo hayu meshamshim mitotehem ela berevi'i b'Shabbat. The early masters would only be with their wives on Wednesday, Yom Revi'i. Why? Shelo yavo neshotehen lidei chilul Shabbat. Because if they were with their wives, let's say on Yom Chamishi, and since pregnancy can only be 271, 272, or 273 days, so there was a good chance that their wife would end up giving birth on Shabbat. And then they'd have to drive to the hospital, and they would be mechalel Shabbat. So they said, if we only have relations on Wednesday, then the 271, 272, 273 will never fall out on Shabbat, and so we'll never come to be mechalel Shabbat when our wives give birth.
Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, not on the table.
Good, okay, good. Berevi'i v'tu lo. So the Gemara says, sorry?
Chilul Shabbos and Yom Tov.
It would lead them
to...
to...
Chilul Shabbos.
Yeah.
You don't have, in the case of Sakana, there's no Chilul Shabbos
Good,
anyway.
good. We're getting to it.
Also Yom Tov. What about
you
Yom
have to
Tov?
calculate
Driving on Yom Tov could have been on any day of the week.
Right.
So in the lead up to your 271 days away from Yom Tov, they couldn't either.
You're saying they also need to have calculated that 9+ months from now is Sukkot, so we should... the Gemara doesn't talk about that, but I assume that could have been part of the logic. But yes, your question of what about Pikuach Nefesh? So good, we're getting to it. And to Shimon's question of what about Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, that's exactly what the Gemara says now. Berevi'i v'tu lo, why just Wednesday? Ema mirevi'i ba'elech. So it actually got it backwards. That was my bad. It means they could do it from Wednesday on. They used to, but not Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, because that would lead them to Chilul Shabbat if you do the calculation. So it's not exactly Wednesday, but it means that no earlier than Wednesday. Amar Marzutra, mai tamayu de chasidim harishonim. Why did they think this? It says in Ruth, Vaiten Hashem la herayon. Okay, it says that Ruth became pregnant. Herayon b'Gematria Maatan ושבעים havu. The Gematria of the word herayon is 271. That's how they knew that herayon is 271 days long. Okay. And then the Gemara concludes, Amar Marzutra, afilu leman damar yoledet l'tish'a, eina yoledet limikuta'im. Okay, so even according to the opinion that someone who gives birth after 9 months, which is full term, cannot have a viable pregnancy after 7 or 8 months, yoledet l'shiva, yoledet limikuta'im. So what that means is if someone's going to have, there's basically, and we'll see this now in detail, there's 2 categories. There's women who can give birth after 7 months, or a 7-month baby and a 9-month baby in halacha, okay? So it says 9-month baby, everybody that, you can't have 8 months and a bit. It has to go to the full term of 9 months. But even according to that opinion, would agree that a 7-month baby can be into the 7th month. It doesn't have to go all the way to 7 months. How do we know that? Shenemar, a pasuk from Shmuel, vayil tkufot hayamim v'tar Chana v'teled ben, that after a certain period of days, Chana became pregnant. Mi'ut tkufot shanim, mi'ut yamim shanim. That it says tkufot in yamim, and tkufa is 3-month period, and a yom is a 1-day period, and each of them is plural. So it means 3 months times 2 and days times 2, which is 6 months, 2 days. That's the minimum viable pregnancy. That's how long Chana was pregnant with Shmuel, which is not up to the full 7 months. It's 6 months and 2 days. But suffice it to say that most births are in the 9-month category. Okay, so I want to touch on the halachic discussion because it's interesting, even though we're focused on Agadah here. The halachic question is, what are these Hasidim Harishonim doing? Okay, now, Mr. Johnny mentioned to us, sir, excuse me, mentioned that, what about Pikuach Nefesh? What are you doing this cheshbonot 9+ months in advance? Maybe your wife will come to Mechalel Shabbat. She's allowed to be Mechalel Shabbat. What's the problem? And you're thinking in advance, maybe you do this preventative, and what, it's not just that you're not doing something. You're not fulfilling relations with your wife, which is a mitzvah in and of itself. So what is going on with the Chasidim Harishonim? Okay? So the Torah T'mimah says as follows in his commentary on Ruth. He references for us a machloket rishonim that is based on this idea. Okay, so why is this a problem? The Hasidim Rishonim says kisheteladna b'Shabbat shenitan reshut lechalala mipnei sakanat gufa. Right, when a woman gives birth on Shabbat, so permission is granted for her to violate Shabbat because of sakanat guf, right? Because of pikuach nefesh, right? Ve'af al pi de kisheteled az mutar lechalel Shabbat alea. But even though when she gives birth, at the moment that she's giving birth, even lechatchila, she's allowed to violate Shabbat for anything that she needs. They didn't want to get into a situation where they would have to be Mechalel Shabbat, even though that situation is entirely permitted. Okay? ומעריץ חיות כתב, דמכאן ראיה לשיטת הרז"ל לעניין איסור הפלגה בספינה 3 ימים קודם השבת. Okay, there's a question, can I go on a boat on Thursday or on Friday? Right? So it's a halachic question that says 3 days before Shabbat, דאסור לגרום חילול שבת, אף דאחר כך יש סכנה ומותר אף לכתחילה. Because on Shabbat, maybe there'll be some situation that'll be pikuach nefesh on the boat, and I have to violate Shabbat, and then it would be fine, it's pikuach nefesh, but there's a machloket whether I'm allowed to go on the boat on Thursday, knowing that I might get into that situation. So he says that the opinion of the Chasidim Rishonim seems to agree with the Shita of the Rishonim who hold that you would actually be prohibited from going on a boat on Thursday. Okay? Masha'en ken ledat haRamban. And the Ramban is famously cholek on this. He says, de'en lemitzvah rak mekoma v'sha'ata, de'en chosheshin mikodem al ma shistavev mizeh. That the Ramban says, ein ma'avirin al mitzvot. I have a mitzvah, now I need to fulfill the mitzvah now. I have an opportunity. I should fulfill the mitzvah now, and I shouldn't start doing calculations of what will either inevitably or possibly be the implications of fulfilling that mitzvah now. I have a mitzvah now. I do the mitzvah, and I deal with what has to be dealt with in the future. So this is machloket rishonim, and it has a lot of different halachic ramifications. There's even a question regarding I knew you had a girl, but even regarding a brit milah, where if the Gemara talks about if the mohel, you're allowed to do brit milah on Shabbat, right? The brit milah is ducha Shabbat. But you're supposed to prepare everything in advance that you can. So what happens? It was part of the Gemara talks about. They used to boil hot water in order to, after the brit milah, to help the baby heal from the circumcision. What happens if the hot water gets poured out by accident on Shabbat? Are you allowed to go? Sorry.
We did that.
It's true, actually. There was a brit milah here like 2 Shabbatot ago, and we got the hot water, but we had it preheated.
No.
From
We
in our
said
urn.
the last one. Last year we said this.
Oh, maybe. I don't think so.
Someone's saying
Regarding chopping down trees to burn wood, to forge metal, to create a mole's knife on Shabbat.
Okay.
So, we see it goes back even to a more stringent yesod of Hilchot Shabbat.
Right. Okay, good. Thank you.
Strengthening, not being cholek chas v'chalila.
Yeah. No, I didn't know that example. But yes, so basically this comes up there as well. Are you allowed to heat up the water or not? This question comes up about ein ma'avirin al mitzvot, or should I plan things in advance? And and that whole thing. So the question there with heating up the water would be, of course, if the water spills, I'm allowed to heat it up on Shabbat for the Brit Milah. But should I, proactively, do I need to try to do it in advance? Anyways, the point is there's a machloket rishonim here, and the Torah Tmima mentions the Chasidim HaRishonim as a potential raya, but then he says, Aval be'emet ein kan echrach mikan. There's really no proof from this case. Why? דהלא מפורש אמרו שרק חסידים הראשונים עשו כן. יכול להיות שהחמירו על עצמן אף בדבר המותר. That, okay, these people fulfilled this, right? They're not, no one claims that this is halachically something that you have to do. It just mentions that there were these extra pious people that used to do this. But even the opinion in the Machloket Rishonim that says, in general, for certain halachic situations, you may need to not go on the boat on Thursday. In this case, with the Chasidim Rishonim, they wouldn't go there. This isn't a raya for that opinion. Okay? And just a quick halachic addendum to that. Again, we'll move on to the Gematria. Is I think a really interesting tshuva of Rabaz. It's actually quite famous. The Rabaz lived in the 1500s, the 1600s, and he was asked a question. He had a shadows of tshuvas. Someone came to him and said, "Ruven haya chavush bebeit ha'asurim." There's a man who's in jail. ולא היה יכול לצאת להתפלל בעשרה ולעשות המצוות. He's stuck in jail, so he can't go out and do, he can't daven with the minyan. He can't leave. והתחנן לפני השר, so he asks the warden of the jail if he can leave. או ההגמון, ולא אהבה שמו על הניחו זולתי יום אחד בשנה. איזה יום שחפוץ. And the warden said to him, you can go free one day a year, whatever day you want, but only one day a year. Okay? יורה המורה, איזה יום מכל ימות השנה יבחר ראובן הנזכר ללכת לבית הכנסת. That, looking at the answer, if you were the Radbaz, right, what would you rule in this case? What day?
Then you can go. You're saying you can go out for a day.
You can leave jail one day a year. You choose the day. What day should he leave?
Or should he go Yom Kippur?
Today.
I learned this story.
How did you learn this? That's amazing. You learned this story? Okay. So why today and why Yom Kippur? יופי. Okay. יופי. אז אתה אומר, אין מעבירין על המצוות, יש לי מצווה עכשיו, right? I have a mitzvah today. I do the mitzvah today. I can go do minyan now. I go do minyan now.
It's like it's a pitachon thing. Let's say you think, it should be Yom Kippur, whatever. Like you say, Matter Asurim, Hashem will hopefully free me. Why should I pick that day in the assumption that Hashem won't free me before then?
Right.
Better take the day.
Take the day, and by then he'll free me.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So the answer to the Rabaz is like you suggested. הנה ראיתי אחד מחכמי דורנו בתשובה דבר זה צלל במים אדירים והעלה חרס בידו. So first the Rabaz says, I saw that other rabbis of our generation gave a specific answer to this question. He says they dove into the deep waters looking for gold or something, and they came up with earth, with pottery. In other words, that they dove trying to come up with like a good insight to answer this question, but in the end they came up with nothing. Why? And he built this chacham built his whole argument on something rickety. בתחילה כתב דעדיף יום הכיפורים. This chacham said first maybe he should go out on Yom Kippur. Right? ואחר כך החליפו ביום הפורים. And then he said maybe on Purim. משום מקרא מגילה ופרסומי ניסה. Because you have the idea of פרסומי ניסה. דבעינן עשרה, you have to have 10 for מקרא מגילה. ואין הראוי לסמוך על דבריו. But the Rabbi says he's not correct. You shouldn't listen to him. אבל מה שראוי לסמוך עליו הוא דענן. Right? You should listen to me. דקיים עלן, דאין מעבירין על המצוות. I am like the Ramban. I say you don't pass over the opportunity to do a mitzvah if it's in your hand. ואין חולק בזה כלל. He says nobody disagrees with this concept. הילקח המצווה הראשונה שתבוא לידו שיהיה אפשר לעשותה. Right? והוא חבוש בבית האסורים קודמת. The first time you can do a mitzvah, you should do it. ואין משגיחין אם המצווה שפגעה בו תחילה היא קלה או חמורה. So his logic is actually not what Shimon said and not what Shai said. He says, you're going to come and tell me davening on Yom Kippur is more important than davening on a random day? How do you know? He says, you don't know what's more important, what's not more important, right? That's something that's not some mitzvot. You should never do a cheshbon. This mitzvah is more important than that mitzvah. And therefore, you should take the opportunity to do the first mitzvah that you can. He says, "V'zeh pashut me'od etzli." This is very obvious to me that this is what you should do. So it's an interesting tshuva of the Radbaz. It ties to the question of the Chasidim HaRishonim and to the Machloket Rishonim that we saw in the Torah.
Okay. With pregnancy, it's an interesting thing for them to limit, because you're already limited with Niddah and everything. Like, in theory, if you start doing all this maths, and then you're Niddah for half a month, and you're like, but only, had the opportunity to do it for these 3 days, this week and next week, and then not for another it's a really limiting thing considering like there's a mitzvah to do it.
Right. Yeah. And it's not even counting Yom Tov, right? So,
Starting the you have like a few weeks a year.
Right. That's why I think it's the Hasidim. It's not nobody. I don't believe any opinion says that's something that anyone other than the most pious people should do. Because you're right. It's a very limiting. It limits half the. You already have half the time from Niddah, and then another half from this is very much limits what you're able to do. Absolutely. Okay. Good. Let us. We'll come back to the question of 7 months versus 9 months if we have time, because I do want to get to, I think, some more interesting things. So hopefully we'll double back. But let us look at the Marasha, Niddah Daf Lamed Chet Amud Aleph, on the second page in the middle. So the Marasha says as follows. Do you guys need a source sheet? All right. So the Marasha says as follows. Yesh lechaven beze ma she'amru b'perek kol kitvei. Ilmale shamru Yisrael shtei Shabbatot miyad nigalin. Okay, this is, I think, a pretty famous idea. If Bnei Israel were to ever keep, all of Bnei Israel as a nation were to keep two Shabbatot in a row, Mashiach would come, immediately they would be redeemed.
Yeah,
Just one
I thought it was. I don't think it has to be in a row. I think the whole idea is that we did one, and it would have been the second one if not for what's his name, who gave an example of himself in the midbar.
Uh-huh.
And then the whole idea is that we have
only one left.
Shabbos of Shvi.
Okay, good.
Everybody's word is halacha.
So okay,
Exactly.
right. Okay. So then that might be how you're meant to understand this. Okay. And the Marasha, he says, Shene'emar, Ko amar Hashem l'sarisim asher yishmeru et Shabtotai. We know this from the Haftorah of fast days, right? That Hashem says to the eunuchs who keep his Shabbat, right? He says he'll give them a yad vashem tov mibanim u'mibanot. Right? They can't have children, but if they keep Shabbat, he will give them something better than children. He'll give them an everlasting name. Im dikdeku lidrosh ken milashon Shabtotai lashon rabim. So the language of that pasuk is that if the eunuchs keep my Shabbatot in the plural, okay? Ve'en miut el shnaim, and whenever you have a plural word, the minimum is 2, and so it's referring to 2 Shabbatot. He says haktiv b'torah chiyagavna shekolel kol Shabbatot kmo ach et Shabtotai tishmoru. So this idea of 2 Shabbatot, okay. V'nira, where is he going with this? The be'ahu kra nakat l'sarisim. So he says, why is it that Hashem says the Sarisim, if they keep my Shabbatot, I'll give them a Yad Vashem Tov Mibanim Libanot? What's the idea of the eunuch specifically? Why are we saying the eunuchs have a special, if they keep Shabbat, then they'll get this blessing of Yad Vashem, as opposed to any other mitzvah? So he says, Leze Amru, Im Yishmeru Shtei Shabbatot, L'sares Atzmam, ולמנוע מפריה ורביעה כחסידים אלו שהיו פורסים מנשותיהם, שלא ילדו נשותיהם זכר בשבת, שאז התחללו 2 שבתות, אחד ביום הלידה ואחד ביום המילה. He says, because a eunuch can't have relations, so it's a remez here to these Hasidim Harishonim, who, as it were, misares themselves. In other words, they refrained from relations with their wives, so that their wives would not come to be Mechalel Shabbat and have a son, and then to drive to the hospital would be Chilul Shabbat one time, and then the Brit Milah would be the Chilul Shabbat the next week, and then they would be violating Shabbat twice. So he says, Asarisim Asher Yishmeru et Shabtotai is talking about the Hasidim Harishonim who were misares themselves to keep Shabbat twice in a row, and they would get a Yad Vashem because of that. Yeah, so that's like a nice idea, I thought. Anyway, okay. There's another Gemara, an entirely different topic that ties to this, in the Gemara Shabbat and Daf Kuf Nun Vav Amud Aleph, which talks about astrology, about how if you're born at different times, under different planets, under different constellations, that has some... sorry? Is it?
Mercury's in retrograde.
Oh, Mercury's in retrograde, right. That it has some effect. Okay? So the Gemara says as follows. Ktiv Pinkasei de Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Okay, in Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi's notebook, it was written, Haiman de Bechad b'Shaba, someone who's born on Sunday, Ikule letevo, Ikule levishu. That child will either be entirely righteous or entirely wicked. He's going to be one or the other extreme. My time di brobe or v'choshech, because on Yom Echad, it was light and darkness were created. Okay? Haiman de betrei b'Shabbat, yehe gvar agzan. Someone born on a Monday is going to be an angry person. My taima mishum deifligu b'maya, because that's when the waters were separated into the heaven, into the sky and into the sea. Haiman de betlata b'Shabbat, people born on Tuesday, yehe gvar atir v'zana yehe. It will be somebody who is promiscuous. My taima mishum dibru be'asavim, because all these weeds sprouted forth and spread out very quickly. Okay. Haiman de barba'a b'Shabbat. Someone born on Wednesday, Yehei Gvar Chakim V'Nahir. Someone born on Wednesday will be wise and insightful. What? That's when. What? You were born on Wednesday. I was also born on Wednesday, actually.
These guys. Is Wednesday the only nice one?
You were born on Friday. We're getting to Friday.
I was born on Friday too.
You were born on Friday. When was? Thursday. All right. Let's see. Thursday. Drum roll. My time, mishum de'itlo be'me'orot. Okay, someone on Wednesday is wise because that's when the luminaries were created or hung. Haiman de bechamsha b'shaba yeh gvar gomel chasadim. Okay, so that's a good one. That's a good one. My time, mishum de'ibru be'dagim ve'ofot. I'm not quite sure what that has to do with gomel chasadim, but okay. That's when the fish and the birds were created. Haiman de b'ma'ale shabta yeh gvar chazran. Okay, so Friday, right? Oh, and you were born on Friday. Friday is going to be someone who returns. What does that mean? Amar of Nachman bar Yitzchak chazran b'mitzvot. Okay, so someone who, he gets into a pattern. He's someone who returns to the mitzvot. V'haiman de b'shabta, someone born on Shabbat. Yehei b'shabta yomot. They will also die on Shabbat. Al de'achilu alo yom rabba de shabta. Since they caused their mother to violate or to be mechalelet Shabbat when they were born, so they are punished by also eventually dying on Shabbat.
They're going to be afraid every Shabbos.
Sorry?
What's Friday?
Yeah, and it says here, Amar Rava bar Rav Shila v'kadesh Rabba yitkare, and it's a person who's very holy, is very high level. So
from the first sentence, it sounds like it's a punishment.
Right, but then he says that it's a good thing. That such a person will be called very great.
What's on Friday?
Friday is someone who does a lot of mitzvot and is a lot. It's a good thing. It's a good thing. Yeah. Okay, so you've never been Paul. You were born on Tuesday. Yeah. Okay. So can anyone guess why I brought this? Just out of to troll the people here. מה? אפשר להיוולד בכל יום. יופי.
אין קשר למה שהחיים הראשונים, כנראה...
אז תגידו יותר מזה. good. תגידו יותר מזה.
החסידים הראשונים כיוונו ליום ספציפי.
בדיוק, אוקיי. אז אמרנו מה? What did we say? The Hasidim הראשונים, they would only have Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, because if they had on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, then they would get into this problem of potentially being Mechalat Shabbat. Now, if we look at the assignment here, Sunday is either totally good or totally bad. Monday is an angry person, that's bad. Tuesday is promiscuous, probably bad. and then Wednesday is wise. Thursday is Gomel Chasadim. Friday is Chazran b'mitzvot. So the days that the Chasidim Rishonim are removing themselves from... that they're saying, I want to do it, that when they are mishamesh mitot tehen on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, so that their children will be born on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, because it's not near Shabbat, and those are the days where the children have the bad astrological signs. This is, just interesting. Okay. Okay, so these are two completely separate ideas. The astrology and the Hasidim Rishonim, they're not necessarily tied together, but I thought it was an interesting thing. Okay, I wanted to close with the Yun Yaakov, and then if we have time, go back and talk a bit about 7 verses 9 months. But the Gemara in Bava Batra, remember what was the source for 271 days? What was the source for the Hasidim Rishonim? It was the word Harion in Gematria is 271, right? From Ruth, that she was Beharayon.
Where did they get the other two numbers from?
We skipped those sources, but Shmuel says then you also have the conception. Like the 271 is the period of the pregnancy, but conception sometimes takes, it can take, between 1 and 3 days for the seed to match the egg. Okay, to find the egg. So there's a bit of flexibility there. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, Oto hayom shebat Ruth Moavia le'Eretz Yisrael. Sorry, I'm on the top of page 3. Bavavat shetzadi Aleph Amud Aleph. V'amar Rabbi Yitzchak, Oto hayom shebat Ruth Moavia le'Eretz Yisrael, meta ishto shel Boaz. Okay, so the day that Ruth came back, right, remember the story? I know we're all asleep usually because we stay up all night and then we fall asleep in Shacharit, but on... So in Sefer Ruth, right, they leave Eretz Yisrael because of the famine, right, and then with the Naomi and this whole story, and then they come back. So the day that Ruth comes back with Naomi to Eretz Yisrael, according to Rabbi Yitzchak, that's the day that Boaz's wife passed away. And Boaz was married before, and he had a wife, she died. And then Ruth came to Eretz Yisrael, and then she started working in his field, and the rest, as they say, is history. V'hainu damri inshe, and that's how they say the famous proverb, Adela shachiv shichva kaima manu baite. That before the head of the household passes on, already the new head of the household has been found or set aside. Okay? So, forgetting everything that we talked about, what's the idea behind a midrash like this, just in its own context, is, at least to me, the idea that this was fate, destiny, right? We're talking about the whole story of Megillat Ruth is about David HaMelech and the beginning of the monarchy, that when Ruth came to Eretz Yisrael, Boaz's wife died because everything here was happening for a reason. There's a story, everybody's acting, but there's a larger meta-historical narrative at play as well. And that's emphasized by the fact that when Ruth came to Eretz Yisrael, Boaz's wife died to make room, as it were, for her to enter the story and become his wife.
Were they already not marrying more than one wife? That kind of... They said it was a later there not to do it, right?
I mean, David HaMelech had 18 wives. The great-grandchild, so...
They still were.
Sorry?
So it's a bit of a...
Megillat Esther in the beginning.
Nachon.
They were.
That's right. It does, that's a good point.
Boaz wouldn't have, so they had to...
That's interesting, because I think there's another midrash that says Boaz was Ibtzan, who's one of the Shoftim, and he's described as having 30 children, and so he probably had more than one wife. Right.
He had to be hundreds of years old if he was Ibtzan.
Yeah, I mean, that's a Gemara ben Furash, I think that he was Ibtzan, but yes, it's a good question. I hadn't thought of that. Again, in Lanu Dati, the point of this midrash is not about whether he actually, it's more making a point about how, there's a certain destiny that's being realized here. But you're right. It doesn't necessarily mean that his wife had to die for him to marry Ruth.
First wife is mentioned?
No, I don't think so. I don't believe so.
Assume,
No.
all right.
Yeah. So that's a Gemara in Bava Batra. In the Yalkut Shimoni, which is a much later midrash, and I couldn't find an earlier version of this. In other words, I think this was a much later midrash historically. It says Vaikach Boaz et Ruth. So then, you fast forward, and Boaz and Ruth they do eventually get together. Amru be'ota halayla sheba alea met. Okay, Boaz was old, and they managed to be together for one night, the night of the wedding, and then Boaz died. Okay, so if you take these two midrashim, that the day that Ruth came to Eretz Yisrael, Boaz's previous wife died, and then Ruth eventually marries Boaz, and then they're together for one night, and Boaz dies. From that night, she becomes pregnant with Oved, Holedet Yishai, Holedet David. So again, it's emphasizing this idea that this was all for the purpose of the birth of the Davidic dynasty. But let's see how the Yun Yaakov takes this idea. The Yun Yaakov, in his commentary, where it says Dichtiv Vayiten Hashem La Herayon, in the picture there, it says Yun Yaakov towards the bottom on the right side. Dichtiv is in big letters. On the left side of the Yun Yaakov, Dichtiv, it's a few lines from the end of the screenshot there. So Dichtiv Vayiten Hashem La Herayon. Okay, so right, so Herayon begim, and then you skip over to the other side of the page. Herayon on the very top, Gematria Reish Ayin Aleph 271, and then he says Ve'ayin Sham Bialkut Amru Oto Laila Sheba Alea Met. So that night that Ruth and Boaz got together, Boaz died after they consecrated their marriage. Lefichach Hakol Yodin Shebeoto Alayla Hit Abra Lachen Yodin HaMispar. So what are they saying? No, it's okay. Herayon is Gematria is 271. So they said no, because if I take this midrash that says that everyone knew when they got married, And Boaz died the next day. So they knew that she only could have gotten pregnant from that night of the wedding, and they see that she gave birth to Oved 271 days later. So they knew exactly Harion Gematria 271. Because there was no other permutation of how long the pregnancy could have taken.
So that's just a specific case. Why does that say anything about anything else?
You could say that about the Joshua regardless. Who cares if Harion is 271 by root?
מי יודע? we said 9 months.
Everyone knows it's around 9 months. Doing this doing the prediction of a very
Of exactly 271. Okay, it's okay. We're at time, but see if there's anything I skipped that's worth looking at too much. Yeah, I think we can stop there. The other sources go into 7 months and 9 months and talk about how 8 months is not viable and the whole thing. But
yeah, then you could look at it. He was very old. It was like he went out. He got remarried.
No wonder
He thought he had a second thing, and then he was like married, had a nice wedding. went out on a high.
מתייחסים כאן ללידה כחילול שבת.
הוא לא ידע עצמו, מה שאתה עושה, אתה צריך להדליק טלפון, לנסוע לבית חולים.
זה כיום, אבל בתקופה שלנו לא היה טלפון.
עדיין, יותר אחרים. צריך לקרוא לה מילדת, צריך לקחת אותה עם חמור לה...
פתאום אולי אתה צריך להדליק אש או להסיק אש. לא, אבל למה...
צריך מים, אתה צריך...
הנחת העבודה שמחלל לשבת לא עבור פיקוח
אתה לא
נפש.
מחויב
אתה לא נענש על זה.
לא, אבל הקונספט הזה שאנחנו זוכרים זה ממש לא היה...
The whole concept doesn't really apply today. We don't really know what that means, that 8 months isn't a viable birth. Right. They say that 8 months is not a viable birth. The child won't live past infancy. To the point that you don't violate Shabbat for the baby. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. And that's consistent in all the sources here. Like all the Midrashim, the Gemara talks about it. Well, I don't know them myself, how that works.
I guess it's your promiscuous sources.
It's actually funny you say that because in the Bereshit Rabbah, okay, it says bone come. They ask Rabbi Abahu, how do we know that after 7 months a child can live? In Bereshit Rabbah, like on the 3rd line. So he says to them, Amar lahen midinchon ana matmelchon. I can tell you from your own language. Zeta epta itat ochta, which is Greek. Zeta eta theta, or zeta eta theta is like zayin chet tet in Greek. It's the letters 7, 8, 9. So zeta epta, I think means, I read in the commentary, he says 7, and then epta is Greek, but it means also will live. It's like 7 will live, and Eda, which is 8, Uchta, which is will die. Like it's a play on words of the names of the Greek letters, that the letter of Zeta, which is the 7th letter, lives and the 8th letter dies. So he said that's how I know that 7 months is viable and 8 is not, from the Greek alphabet. Yeah.
עשינו הרבה ככה ומצאנו הרבה פתרונות.
Zeta, theta.
Like what, I was 6 scared of 7.
Right.
Why was 6 afraid of 7? Because 7, 8.
It's basically the same thing.
The OG.
אתה עדיין מקליט אותי?
מה? אתה מקליט אותך?
לא יודע, זה מקליט.
באיזה תנאים אתה מנהל דיון?
לא, יש פה דברים פוליטיים.
1,001 היתרים.
אז להפסיק את הכל.
הוא לא תאמין שאתה...